Welcome back. You're still watching The Globe on the SABC News Channel. Today, 27 years ago, a genocide erupted in Rwanda, killing 1 million people in just a short few months. And that's been a stain that the country has fought to deal with and has worked hard over time to build a new nation out of the ashes of that genocide. Well, to get a sense of where the country is now, 27 years later, the feelings of ordinary Rwandese, we now joined by Dr. Frederick Golloba-Mutebi, who's a Ugandan-based political analyst, but he's in Kigali today. Thanks very much indeed. Always good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. What is the mood like in Kigali? It's 27 years later, but I guess on a day like today, for many, it feels like just the other day.
Yeah, as has always been the case when they're commemorating the genocide against the Tutsi in this country, today has been very somber. There have been very few cars on the roads. I was out early in the day and there were very few cars. All businesses are usually closed. And funny enough, or surprisingly, it always rains on this day. And I understand even on that very day when the genocide started, it rained as well. So it was raining this afternoon. The country is very somber and everything comes to a standstill. So people are at home. Very few people are out and about. Yeah, not any different from other commemoration events that I have witnessed over the last 20 years.
So those people that you talk to, typically, what kind of conversations happen on a day like today?
It's not a day on which people have many conversations. People tend to stay home and keep to themselves or their families. We normally have public events at which some people are present, the president and a number of dignitaries. Normally it's a fairly large event held in this national stadium. This time it was held in the Kigali Arena and there was social distancing as you would imagine under the circumstances of the COVID pandemic. But it's not a day when there are many conversations to be had. People usually spend their time reflecting on what happened during that very difficult period, but also what has happened since the genocide ended and since the current government took over, and how the country has evolved, but also how relations among the different communities have also evolved over that period.
Well, let's talk about some of those things because, you know, one would think after that genocide and so many lives lost, so many children orphaned, that it would have been really difficult and nigh impossible for some to say that the new Rwanda that we see today could have been built out of that. What do you think has been the energy and the force that's created this country that appears reconciled and working hard to progress at a rate that we hardly see in other parts of the continent?
Yeah, I think that one thing we need to bear in mind is that the genocide against the Tutsi was the result of very many years of indoctrination of the general public by the governments that governed this country before the current government came in. So when the current government came in, that changed. Instead of dividing the population, the government really put a lot of emphasis on bringing people together. The government decided that instead of establishing a process through which those people who had participated in the genocide would be punished in a retributive sense, they put up a process through which people were encouraged to talk about what they had done. People were given fairly light sentences with the exception of the planners of the genocide. And eventually people were released in their communities after doing communal work, and their neighbors and their victims encouraged to reconcile with them. It's been a difficult process, and as President Kagame has pointed out on several occasions, it hasn't been very easy for the victims, but the human spirit is a very amazing thing. People have moved on. They may not have forgotten what happened, but a lot of people have decided that there is nothing to be gained from continuing to divide communities or to feel that they can't live with those people that hurt them. So it's been difficult, but a lot of progress has been made. And yes, it's all down to the very, very gallant efforts of the people who lead this country to reorient the population away from divisiveness to coming together in the interest of building a new country and taking the country forward.
As you
So,
said,
yeah,
there was a route that Rwanda took in terms of trying to get some, I guess, restorative justice. But I suppose 27 years later, there is still some hurt because over 1,000 people, I believe, masterminds or people involved are still unpunished and are living in countries even as close as DRC and in Europe, and that until they're brought to book, perhaps justice really hasn't finally been delivered.
Well, justice hasn't been delivered completely, but within the country itself, a lot of progress has been made. As you mentioned, there are perpetrators of the genocide. There are those who were really key in planning it, who still live outside Rwanda, who live in countries that one would imagine would have been very keen to get these people brought to book. Countries like France, countries like the UK, and actually even surprisingly, a number of African countries are still harboring genocide suspects, and they have found it difficult for whatever reason to extradite them to Rwanda to face justice or even to try them themselves. You have Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia, and even neighboring countries like DRC, Uganda. So yes, in a sense, there are many people who should have been brought to book who are no longer living in Rwanda, who escaped and are still out there engaging in activities such as genocide denial, but also others engaging in insurgent activities and seeking to return to Rwanda to start from where they stopped. So yeah, that is still a problem out there. But within the country, the planners are still serving their sentences. Those that they obliged to take part in the genocide or whom they influenced, those who owned up to their crimes, a lot of them have left jail and live in the communities where they committed these crimes. Many of them alongside the families whose members they killed. But as I said, the government has worked very hard to see that at least there is a degree of reconciliation that enables the country to move forward. I mean, the pain doesn't go away. But yeah, people have accepted that it's in the interest of everyone to try and bring the country together, not to forget what happened, but to try and build a new country in which Rwandans can live without discrimination, without anybody feeling that they are less of human beings than any other group of Rwandans. So in that sense, a lot of progress has been made inside the country.
How well have the communities come together? Are Rwandese first, and then Hutu and Tutsi and other tribes later?
That is the gospel the government has been preaching. Some people misread this and say, look, the government of Rwanda has outlawed ethnicity. No, actually, it hasn't. What the government emphasizes is that it is more important for people to see themselves first and foremost as Rwandans and therefore equal before the law, and having equal rights, and making it impossible for anyone to make claims on the state on the basis of their social category, whichever social category they may belong to. Now, a lot of Rwandans have accepted this as what is necessary to overcome their very difficult history. Within communities, a great deal of, yes, reconciliation has taken place. I have been to events where actually genocide perpetrators have been welcomed back. They live side by side with families whose members they killed. They have owned up to their sins and apologized. And yeah, their victims have felt it necessary to try as much as possible to reconcile with these people in the interest of building a new country. Yes, there is a lot of change across Rwanda. And yeah, these people have been freed. They never expected to be treated this way. And a lot of them, as a result of how they have been treated subsequent to having been incarcerated and served and serving their sentences, they have been overwhelmed by the welcome they received. And a lot of people have really been transformed in this through this process.
What would you say has been the greatest lesson out of Rwanda that the rest of the continent can learn? Because a lot of the issues that are playing out, although they don't often come out in genocides and things like that, but the tensions are there. And I wonder, what can we learn from Rwanda?
The tensions are there, but they're not open tensions of the kind that you would see actively dividing communities. Peter, I did live in South Africa for 4 years. I lived there and worked there, and I lived in rural South Africa. And I can tell you that my experience of both countries suggests to me that actually here there is much more willingness for people to move on. They're not the kind of tensions that I used to feel in South Africa between black and white South Africans, for instance. There is a degree to which they did not really coexist or live together because communities were separated, sometimes due to socioeconomic differences. Here, as I told you, perpetrators of the genocide did move back into the communities in which they committed crimes, and they have been welcomed back. There are things like cooperatives, farming cooperatives, and trading cooperatives in which people are members, people who, both those who committed crimes and their victims. So there has been a significant moving forward. But also, I think that in terms of lessons that could be learned from this country, one of them is that Rwanda has a political system that has minimized contestations, which might have made it possible for those who want to cause trouble again or to divide society to ride on political campaigns, for instance, to say form sectarian political parties and whip up these things again. That has been avoided. Rwanda has a political system that lays emphasis on seeking consensus and deciding collectively which direction the country should take. And I think that that has been very important. We Africans like fetishizing democracy and competitive electoral systems and adversarial contestation among political parties. That does tear communities apart. And I think that if the Rwandans had tried that, it would have made reconciliation and stability in this country very, very difficult to achieve. So I think that that's a great lesson that other African countries could learn.
Dr. Golloba-Mutebi, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for giving us some insights into this remarkable journey that Rwanda has been on since the genocide 27 years ago. Thanks so much indeed for your time, sir.
Thank you, Peter, for hosting me.